So what did you see? Have another look. What can you spot? One thing or two things? I'll put two things at the end of the video. If you only spotted one thing, you may have spotted both things. I'm an avid reader and read extensively, so I don't do book reviews generally on this channel. A few music video, I've done a few videos about various music books I would recommend, but this is Iain McGilchrist's last book, called The Master and His Emissary: The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. To quote from him, the quality of the world that comes to our attention depends upon the quality of the attention that we bring. This is a book which talks about the two hemispheres of the brain and how we attend, and how one fundamentally attends differently to the other. It's a masterpiece of a book. If you haven't read it, come with me to this field and meet me there and explore. As Rumi said, out beyond the ideas of wrongdoings and right doings, there's a field. I'll meet you there. Be lovely if we could meet people more there to have these kind of discussions. The great Socratic philosophers, actually even the pre-Socratic philosophers such as Heraclitus and Parmenides, they fostered dialogue, putting your own presuppositions aside, engaging in somebody else's dialogue, and then forming a synthesis. At any point, putting what you thought was whatever true is to one side, to bring in another perspective to inform what you were currently attending to. So Iain's new book has arrived. It came in the post today, and it's called The Matter with Things. This beautiful, beautiful, beautiful book. This is part 2, volume 2. And here's the first volume. I've just started reading the introduction. It only arrived this morning. A beautiful, stunning book. Interesting to note that the size in difference could be actually comparable with the hemispheres. I don't know if Iain meant that on purpose. Interesting if he did. And here's a little bit of Iain reading the introduction from this book.
Volume 1, The Ways to Truth. Epigraph from Wilde at Penfield. The problem of neurology is to understand man himself. From Plotinus. But we, who are we? Introduction. Epigraph from Ludwig Wittgenstein. Yes, a key can lie forever in the place where the locksmith left it, and never be used to open the lock the master forged it for. This book is an attempt to convey a way of looking at the world quite different from the one that has largely dominated the West for at least 350 years. Some would say as long as 2,000 years. I believe we have systematically misunderstood the nature of reality and chosen to ignore or silence the minority of voices that have intuited as much and consistently maintained that this is the case. Now we have reached the point where there is an urgent need to transform both how we think of the world and what we make of ourselves. Attempting to convey such a richer insight is the ambition of this book. We have been seriously misled, I believe, because we have depended on that aspect of our brains that is most adept at manipulating the world in order to bend it to our purposes. The brain is, importantly, divided into two hemispheres. You could say, to sum up a vastly complex matter in a phrase, that the brain's left hemisphere is designed to help us apprehend and thus manipulate the world, the right hemisphere to comprehend it, to see it all for what it is. The problem is that the very brain mechanisms which succeed in simplifying the world so as to subject it to our control militate against a true understanding of it. Meanwhile, compounding the problem, we take the success we have in manipulating it as proof that we understand it. But that is a logical error. To exert power over something requires us only to know what happens when we pull the levers, press the button, or utter the spell. The fallacy is memorialized in the myth of the sorcerer's apprentice. It is hardly surprising, therefore, that while we have succeeded in coercing the world to our will to an extent unimaginable even a few generations ago, we have at the same time wrought havoc on that world precisely because we have not understood it. This book, then, is about the nature of reality. It's about how we are equipped by our brains to try to understand it, and what we can learn from that. It's about the approaches that are available to us to gain an understanding of reality, given that equipment. It attempts, consequently, to give an account of reality that seems truer to the evidence than the one to which we have long been accustomed, one that is far-reaching in its scope and consistent across the realms of contemporary neurology, philosophy, and physics. And from that follows an account of who we are, on which nothing less than our future depends. What in particular I offer here is a new synthesis of philosophy and science, which I believe is importantly and excitingly liberating to both parties. As a rule, philosophy and science go on as if the other did not exist. Scientists tend to see philosophy as a luxury they can't afford to get involved with, a ball and chain that will slow them down in their race for the next discovery. Philosophers to see science as somewhat beneath them, and in any case irrelevant to the ponderings of the mind on itself. But, as the great physicist Erwin Schrödinger put it in Science and Humanism, it seems plain and self-evident, yet it needs to be said. The isolated knowledge obtained by a group of specialists in a narrow field has in itself no value whatsoever, but only in its synthesis with all the rest of knowledge, and only inasmuch as it really contributes in this synthesis toward answering the demand, Tines de hemais, who are we? Here Schrödinger is remembering Plotinus, one of the greatest Greek philosophers, but his point is of a contemporary relevance that it is impossible to overstate. 70 years on from Schrödinger's pronouncement, specialization makes it even harder to expect more than a tiny handful of scientists and philosophers to be in a position to venture into a genuinely new understanding of their, in reality, common enterprise, one that has the potential hugely to enrich both parties. When any attempt is made to reach out a hand across the distancing void, it is almost invariably an exercise in reinforcing the status quo, the scientists telling the philosophers that they find only machinery, and the philosophers reflecting back to the scientists that a mechanistic view is the best option on offer. Since what you find is a product of how you attend, this is a more or less pointless exercise in making sure that both parties sink to the bottom in the shortest possible time. Philosophy is engaged in weighing evidence so as to decide between conflicting ways of understanding the world, each of which has something to be said for it. This is why philosophy never ends. But what if, among the evidence, there was some way of recognizing a particular take on the world as not just floating in a contextual void, but rather the predictable result of paying a quite particular kind of attention to the world? And what if we happen to know a great deal about the evolutionary purposes and the consequences of such a way of attending, including what weight we should attach to its findings? And what if such insights gained from science and explicated by philosophy could be applied in turn to the science of mind itself? Then might we not begin to see a fertile symbiosis of philosophy and science helping one another, each turn building on the next, to rise to a new, more truthful vision of who, indeed, we are?
That was a few words from Iain McGilchrist reading the introduction. Here's a few words from inside panel of the book, which I think really sums up very well what the book is about. Is the world essentially inert, mechanical, nothing but a collection of things for us to use? Are we ourselves nothing but the playthings of chance, embroiled in a war of all against all? Why indeed are we engaged in destroying everything that is valuable to us? Whitehead, Alfred North Whitehead, who famously said, "We are finite beings, and thus a grasp is denied to us." So Whitehead observed that philosophy is of urgent importance because, as we think we live, the book argues that if we are wreaking havoc on ourselves and the world, and if our best intentions lead to paradoxical outcomes, it is because we have become mesmerized by a mechanistic, reductionist way of thinking, the product of a brain system which evolved not to help us understand, but merely to manipulate the world, that of the left hemisphere. We have become blind to what the subtler, more intelligent and more perceptive right hemisphere sees. Consequently, we no longer seem to have the faintest idea who we are, what the world is, or how we relate to it. Indeed, there is a sense in which we no longer live in a world at all, but exist in a simulacrum of our own making. And there's a reference to the great book by Baudrillard about simulation and simulacra. I'm in the process of writing a book that deals with the matters of awareness, attention, the evolution of consciousness, and various matters. And there's a little bit in that book where I talk about Plato's famous cave allegory, and I think it's very appropriate for what I've been talking about today with this book. So here's a little bit from my book, talking about the Plato cave allegory. Plato tells the story of a group of people that have lived chained to the wall of a cave all of their lives, forever facing a blank wall in front of them. They watch shadows projected on the wall from objects passing in front of the fire. Like the sun, we can't see behind it. Behind the fire was the entrance to the cave. They give names to the shadows they saw. The shadows are the prisoner's reality. The people of this place don't desire to leave their cave, for they know no other life. One prisoner manages to break free one day and discovers that their reality was not what they thought it was. As Plato writes, previously he had been looking merely at the phantoms. Now he is nearer the true nature of being. When he comes back to tell them, they beat him up for not being truthful. They know reality, and they can't be told about another reality. This is what all truth tellers can expect when one has not devoted one's life to thinking. The shadows are interpretations or misrepresentations of reality, phantoms projected towards our flawed minds. We have all started in that cave. Is the cave the womb? Can we distinguish between appearance and reality? Plato's later thinking was interested in an attempt to separate appearance from reality, for beyond the appearances, I might suggest, lies the real. Can you gain access to the real? Can you turn your head and see if you are being fooled? Or even better, escape? Can you recognise a hyper-reality simulation whose ideology is being served in this world? Finally, I'd like to mention this book by Owen Barfield. I'm very much influenced by Barfield, and he has been a great help in forming this book that I've been writing myself. And he has one of his masterpieces called Saving the Appearances. As it says on the back, saving the appearances is about the world as we see it, and the world as it is.
Well, I don't think that the mind is something that goes on in the brain. I think the brain was originally formed by the mind, or by mind, not any particular person's mind, and then used the brain to produce the subjective picture of the world with which we live.
So I've put the links in the bottom. I'll put the links at the bottom for the Owen Barfield estate as well, but also the links for Iain McGilchrist's new book and his YouTube channel. We urgently need this kind of dialogue. To not have it shines a light on the fact that we should be having it. Thanks for watching this. I promise I'll be back to more musical content, but I just wanted to share with you a very, very important book. Bye for now.